And now we're going to bring in our bracketology expert. That's right, Jason Carmelo here with us once again to talk through the Big Ten bubble teams. Jason, been too long. Glad to have you back. A lot has happened since we last had you on.
That's right. Thanks for having me, JR.
For sure. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at your website. I don't know if
Okay.
everybody has been there or not, but great website, big-underdog.com. Jason Carmelo does a great job here with all the stuff. So this is your current seed list as of March 2nd. Obviously, this is coming out on March 3rd if you're listening to this. So bubble stuff does change, but the impacts of some of the things we're going to talk about in this episode do not change as much. If they do change majorly, like I said, we'll probably have another bubble episode at some point. So, Jason, the two teams I want to focus on here as we begin is Iowa, who you have down here as an 8 seed, and UCLA as a 10 seed, because both of those teams suffered bad losses this weekend. UCLA suffered a loss to Minnesota. Iowa suffered the loss to Penn State, which is actually only a quad 2 loss, so not as bad as some people thought, but still not a loss you want to take. What are your thoughts on Iowa and UCLA's outlook here to the end of the season? If they lose both of their games, are they out? I mean, Iowa still has Michigan and Nebraska left, so those are two pretty good teams. But UCLA, they have USC, and I'm forgetting what the other team is off the top of my head here.
Nebraska.
Nebraska, that's right.
That's
so,
right.
what are your thoughts on how UCLA and Iowa need to end the season to get in?
Yeah, Jared, this is a really good question because we'll get to Ohio State in a minute, but a lot of these Big Ten bubble teams are starting to kind of get really close and have similar profiles, right? A couple big wins have changed the dynamic of it. Let's start with Iowa. They obliterated Ohio State midweek, and I think they were on a high. And, you see the ups and downs during conference play. That's why a lot of teams alternate wins and losses. But Iowa had that big win, and that pretty much secured their tournament bid. That pretty much got them in. They needed to take care of business at Ohio State, and they did. I think everybody assumed they would go to Penn State and win, and they didn't, right? So now that's really the first time all season. I think Iowa's got the benefit of the doubt. Their metrics have always been good. When you watch them, they pass the eye test, they pass the metrics test. Both of their sides of the metrics are in the 30s, which is really, really good. And they didn't have any bad losses. That was their card. We don't really have any bad losses. Recently at Maryland's a little slippery, right? They lost there, and then at Penn State. So now they're building some back end losses that you don't want to have. They had the home win over Nebraska in that rock fight, right? That low 50s rock fight. The win at Indiana is actually not looking as good as it did 3 weeks ago. So when you kind of zoom out, Iowa's probably sitting on the 8 or 9 line right now, but that is not secure. They're probably going to slide back. And if they can't beat Michigan and lose to Nebraska, you could absolutely see a scenario where Iowa ends up on the 10 line for March Madness. And UCLA, Iowa's in, though. Iowa will make the tournament. UCLA, on the other hand, only has 2 wins against the field. Iowa has 3 against the field, and UCLA only has 2 wins against the field. They're fantastic wins. Illinois and Purdue, both buzzer beaters at home. Great. What's hurting UCLA and why they're a little bit further back than Iowa is this. They're 3-9 on road and neutral games. Iowa's 6-7. You don't have to be great on the road, but you've got to win some of them. And the committee is going to look at that and say, 3-9 on the road, and you only have anything to hang your hat on at home, you need more than that. So I think it's really critical. It seems simple, but really critical for UCLA to keep winning. I think UCLA is probably about an 85% chance metrically to kind of make the tournament. They're probably in, but they're not completely in. Right? That some catastrophic things would have to happen for them to not get in. I believe they would. There's not a whole lot. There's only about 5 or 6 teams separating Iowa from UCLA right now.
Very interesting. Yeah, if you go over here to your bubble matrix here that you have on the website, which I quote tweeted you putting this out there because I just think it's such a fantastic resource that you put together here. So Texas, Ohio State, and UCLA are actually in your top 3 of bubble teams to make the tournament here. But of course, like we talked about with UCLA, you have USC and Nebraska still left on the schedule, both quad 1 games, so they wouldn't be terrible losses, but definitely a place where UCLA needs to take care of business here. Let's switch on over to the Buckeyes. They get the big win over Purdue. Buckeye Nation very happy, very excited, but they can't get too happy and excited because they go to Penn State, where Iowa just showed us it's not exactly a super easy place to win at, especially when Mike Rhodes has his guys continuing to play hard. It's a young team. Those guys are going to be, a lot of them are going to be back next year if they don't don't transfer anything. So how big of a win was it for Ohio State to get the win over Purdue? And could they afford a loss to either at Penn State or Indiana at home to end the season?
Yeah. So JR, I mean, Ohio State was, and it's been this way really for 4 years, living on the bubble. They've been right on the edge, and they just needed a big win to solidify their resume. Ohio State all season has had wonderful metrics, right? So when we say metrics, statistical numbers that say Ohio State's a pretty good basketball team. And that makes sense. When they played North Carolina, they led in the last, 30 seconds of the game and got beat. They played Virginia, they led with 5 minutes to go. They played Michigan State, they led with 8 minutes to go. So the statistic numbers say Ohio State's a very good basketball team. And predictive metrics don't care if you win or lose. It's the resume metrics on the other side that have always just been higher than they probably should be for an NCAA tournament. All that changed over the last week or so. The Wisconsin win at home and then the Purdue win at home changed all of it. So now the resume metrics, the numbers that say how did you win enough games, now are starting to correlate with those predictive metrics. So long story short, it was a win that absolutely puts them in the tournament for now. I think they need at minimum a split. I think if they split, they're probably going to end up in Dayton. I think if they win both games, they can avoid Dayton. So that's just kind of, you never know what the bubble is going to have. And we may talk about other conferences soon, but that's kind of quick math. Indiana is absolutely going to need the game. They don't have the depth of quad 2 wins that the Buckeyes have. So Indiana's going to need it. So it's going to be a cage fight, this weekend. But I think Ohio State has to win one of the 2 games. And like you said, the highs and lows after a court storm, right? So you deal with a huge win, a court storm. Everybody put everything in. I mean, Tilly could barely walk. Bynum didn't practice. Mobley's playing with a taped hand, right? Royal's been sick. All those parts and pieces added up to everybody played so wonderfully. It's going to be a quiet, sleepy gym on a Wednesday night in Happy Valley. And if you get behind early, you start pressing, realizing we might just be giving this tournament away. So there's actually quite a bit of pressure in the game. But I think if they beat Penn State, they make the tournament. If they lose to Penn State, then they're going to have to beat Indiana to make the tournament. I don't think they can go 0-2. They would need to do quite a bit of work then to make up that ground in the NCAA tournament, in the Big Ten tournament. And we've seen over the years, we've talked about this in the past year, the Big Ten tournament wins don't count as they don't have the weight that I think a lot of people attach to them, because really they're just one of a 32 game season data point wise.
Mm-hmm. For sure. That's going to be my next question here to Indiana, who you have Indiana looks like third team out. So in the first 4 out here right now, the Hoosiers, I believe they're on a 4-game losing streak. So tough news for them right there. But they do get Ohio State, as you mentioned, here to end the season. And then they also have Minnesota at home. Now, their last 2 games have been at home, and they've not won either of those. Granted, one was against Michigan State, but one was also against Northwestern. So not a gimme for Indiana, but if they can take care of business against Minnesota, they should be able to give a good game to Ohio State. Is that enough for Indiana to get in if they beat Minnesota and beat Ohio State? Or if they lose one of those 2 games, could they make up some work in the Big Ten tournament?
I think if they go 2-0, they probably make the tournament as well. They're right on the cusp. But I think the last team in the tournament right now, I have VCU by all the statistical numbers, and they're just record just better than everybody else. And Auburn has too many losses. We'll talk about that soon. I think VCU might be the last team in the tournament. The last team in the tournament is really hard right now, and Indiana could absolutely be that team. You could make an argument for VCU. You can make an argument for Indiana, or maybe even San Diego State. Any of those teams could probably be right there. Indiana, they have to take care of business at home against Minnesota, like you mentioned, JR. And then they're going to have to win at Ohio State. If not, there's just not the depth of wins. So just to kind of zoom out, Indiana is 2-11 in quad 1 games. Now, again, they did beat Purdue at home, and they had a really nice win at UCLA. That's two really good wins, but it's 2-11. You say, well, Ohio State's 2-10. Yes, but here's the difference. Ohio State is 6-1 in quad 2. And while those aren't all tournament teams, those are still pretty good wins, and there's a depth of them. Indiana's 2-1. Ohio State has 4 more quad 2 wins. And sometimes it's about quantity, not always quality. Now, of course, the tournament committee wants the high-end wins, but you've got, Indiana is, 4-12 against the top 2 quadrants. And typically NCAA tournaments there are not resumes that are like that and make NCAA tournaments. So they need just a depth of wins And so they'll have to go 2-0 to get there, and then maybe even some work in the Big Ten tournament.
Last team in the Big Ten I'm going to ask you about here, and I'm asking you about them because they're on the bubble metrics here, but I am of the opinion I don't think they really have a shot. However, they do have a technically quad one game against Washington this next game at Washington. That's not as bad of a road trip as it is for some other teams with them being out there on the West Coast. And then they get to play another bubble team in UCLA. And we know that they do take, the committee does take head to head into account. So that could possibly be something that could propel USC here, but they're 7-11 in the Big Ten right now. I mean, does USC have a path to make the NCAA tournament?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but yeah, probably JR.
Wow.
But it's a pretty dark path. Their best player, Chad Baker Mazzara, just quit the team, and the committee's going to see that and say, well, they don't have their best player. But also, if they win their last 2 games without him, maybe there is a path. The reason why you can't take them off the team sheets yet is they have a wins above bubble number in the 40s. And so if you're in the 40s, you absolutely have a chance to make the NCAA tournament. That wins above bubble number, the wins above an average bubble team, that's ahead of Cal, it's ahead of Cincinnati. That's, pushing the limits. It's pushing the limits of where Virginia Tech is right now. And Virginia Tech is absolutely in the mix, especially if they beat Virginia. And so they have to kind of be a part of the conversation. They've got 7 quad 2 wins. They won a lot of games out in Maui early in the season. And so they're non-conference. They absorbed and won quite a bit of games early in the season. They weren't great wins, but they were pretty good wins. And so those all still count. So it'd be kind of unfair to rule them out. I don't think they make the tournament. I think they have too much to go. Their program's in turmoil. They're not playing very well. It'd be hard to believe that they would be able to do that, but they're still a heartbeat, although very faint.
Very interesting. And yeah, they've lost their last 5 games. So this was a team that looked like they were very well in for a while, and they just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. So we'll see. Maybe Chad Baker Mazzara, maybe he just something was in the locker room and they'll come out and play him better next time. We'll see. There is a little bit of hope for USC.
I'd give him 5% chance, JR, maybe about 8% chance. There's not much there. Too many teams to jump, especially with bid thieves coming. But there's a possibility, but very, very low.
Yeah. Well, and you look at your bubble matrix, they have a 48 wins above bubble. Auburn with a 47. Auburn's the first team out here. So, who knows? Maybe that could play into it. We'll see. But I think the strength of schedule one is probably the thing that makes it the bigger difference there. 2 for Auburn, 32 for strength of schedule of USC. All right. Last thing here I'll ask you about, because when we are so into our Big Ten bubble, we don't always see all the other teams. We might see the big teams in other conferences, Duke, Arizona, Iowa State, right? Some of those teams. However, I always pay attention to the other bubble teams. It was not a very good weekend for other bubble teams out there. I think Cal might have ruined their shot at the NCAA tournament this weekend. SMU has not been helping themselves out very much either. Fill us in on some of the SEC, Big 12, and if you want to mention some ACC teams as well, feel free, that people need to know about that are maybe falling or rising right now in the Big Ten bubble, or in the NCAA tournament bubble.
Okay, so let's kind of zoom out and say Selection Sunday is coming. You got a Big Ten team that you're really rooting for. One of the big takeaways is this: there's usually about 2 bid thieves that take teams from smaller conferences. So what's a bid thief? Well, a bid thief would be right now in the Atlantic 10, St. Louis is projected to make the tournament, and no one else is projected to make the tournament. So let's say Dayton wins the Atlantic 10. Well, St. Louis is still going to make it. Dayton would take a spot in the field. So for now, they might take, VCU or someone else at the bottom of the bracket. So it's a team that is not going to make the tournament unless they win their conference tournament. That's how bid thieves work. There's usually an average of 2. Some years it's up to 4 or 5. So when there's no hard and fast rules, and that's why the Indiana question is really tough, is how they do and how other teams work is going to play into it and how many bids are stolen. But we're trying to help kind of shed some light. If we look at, to answer your question, JR, in the SEC, I think Missouri has played their way into the tournament. A lot of really strong wins. So if you're seeing bracketology, with all due respect, if you're seeing bracketology where Missouri is floating on the cut line or in the last 4 in, that's not accurate. Missouri's making the tournament, so don't get your hopes up. You don't have to spend time staying up to root against Missouri. Missouri's going to make the tournament, even with the really difficult schedule they're in. Then if you take a look at Auburn was a team that, just a handful of weeks ago was sitting in kind of that 6-7 line. They've gone all the way back. And Auburn now sits as my first team out. And the reason they're there is they're 15-14. And traditionally, when we talked about this in previous pods, traditionally 15 losses equate into not making the tournament. The committee traditionally, if you play a hard strength of schedule, Auburn's is second best in the whole country. They'll give you 14 losses if your strength of schedule is hard. They usually don't give you 15. Well, you say, well, Auburn's the second best. Maybe they'll give you 15. Okay, but they're not going to give you 16. That's the concern. Auburn's 15-14. They just had a quad 3 loss at home to Ole Miss, and they have to go to Alabama in the last game of the season this weekend. So that could be 15 losses. You got to count the one in the SEC tournament. If they don't win the SEC tournament, that's 16. I don't see a path, even with the strength schedule that high. You still have to reward winning. You can't look at a VCU or some of these teams with, a 70% winning percentage, 75% winning percentage, and say you don't get to make it for a team that's one game over 500. So I don't really see a path anymore for Auburn unless they beat Alabama. But they're going to have to beat Alabama to make the tournament. 16 losses will be too much. So that's kind of there's not a ton of bubble teams in the SEC. It's pretty much whether Auburn can get in or not. If we kind of pan towards the Big 12 is pretty straightforward as well. TCU has amazing wins. They've beaten Florida, they've beaten Iowa State, but they've lost to New Orleans. You heard that right, New Orleans. And they also lost at home to Notre Dame. Those are really bad losses. So, but TCU's kind of their depth of really high-end wins probably gets them in. I think TCU's, probably 85% chance or so to make the tournament. And that's about it in the SEC. A&M is, you can make an argument that they could slide out as well. TCU and A&M are right there. But I think both of those teams ultimately make the NCAA tournament. A&M is probably a little scarier, but again, those teams are making the tournament. There's not a ton in the SEC. And in the Big 12, it's really the TCU in the Big 12. And the other Big 12 teams are kind of locked in. There's no other periphery bubble teams except for if you want to count Cincinnati, but they're about 5 or 6 teams back. That a lot of things would have to happen, and they already have 14 losses. So long story short, other teams, everything else kind of factoring in is a really big deal. In the Big 12, keep an eye on TCU, but they're probably going to make it because they're high in wins. In the SEC, it's A&M, and they've got to show that they can win in neutral court games, but by and large, they're in. It's really coming down to a few teams. The Mountain West is really, really important for Big Ten teams. Like, that's the conference. Is New Mexico or San Diego State going to win the Mountain West Conference tournament? That's going to be the big piece, because Utah State will have an at-large bid, and how many spots the Mountain West will directly impact the Big Ten.
Very interesting. Let me ask you this one last question. I didn't write it down for you, so I am coming in a little interesting here. But last question, then we'll get you out of here. 10 teams for the Big Ten was your prediction last time we were on. That's still what Net predicts. I mean, that's what most things still predict out there. But it looks like if Indiana doesn't make it, they could possibly get to 9 teams or something like that. I mean, is 10 teams still your prediction? Do you think that, maybe 9 teams is getting more and more likely at this point? What are your thoughts on the number of teams?
I think 9 teams is probably about a 70% chance. Indiana's going to have to do a lot of work. They're going to have to win at Ohio State, which they very well might. But they're gonna have to do that. I'd say 9 teams is the highest probability. 10 is possible, maybe 30-40% chance of 10 teams. I don't see 11. There's not really a path towards 11 anymore, especially with some bid thieves coming like we talked about. So I'd say 9 is a really high probability. Someone, either Ohio State or Indiana or UCLA, 2 of those 3 are making the tournament. 2 of those 3 are getting in. So that gives you 9, like you said. There's a chance at 10, but I think it's a higher probability now at 9. No one foresaw just the bottom falling out of USC. Like I said, USC was way out ahead of UCLA, Ohio State, Indiana in terms of securing a bid. I mean, they were in the 85th percentile or so 3 weeks ago of making the tournament. The only path on them not making the tournament was pretty much, losing 6 or 7 out of their last 8. And that's exactly what has happened thus far.
Just crazy. All right, Jason, thank you so much for coming in once again. Everybody do go check out Jason's website, big-underdog.com, and then your Twitter handle, Jason.
At Big Underdog Blog.
There you go, at Big Underdog Blog. All right. Thanks, Jason. We appreciate it, everybody. We'll be right back after this.
Thanks so much.